Thank you. First thing is, I want everybody who has any concept of what Trumpeter or Tundra Swan range in North America is to forget that for this talk. Because I don't want you spending time looking into maps going, why didn't he include that one? So, hold on, it's easier. So I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Jeff Snyder from Oregon, Arnella Trent from Maryland, and Richard Landman from Los Altos, California. We're all working on this. And if I say I during this talk, I mean we. So I will try to say we when I can. Okay, so why do this? We've already got pretty good maps from Banco. It's been amended by Harry Lumsden and Ruth Shea, Osgarten and Joe Ball. There are new distribution maps in Baldessari, the Birds of the World Species accounts, and eBird and Trumpeter Watch. They all cover this pretty well. But we do have questions, and there are still occasionally disputes on where swans belong. And I expect they will resurrect over time, as things do. So we want to know when and where did various swan species occur? Where should trumpeter swans be introduced? What efforts constitute reintroduction versus translocation? And these questions should interest swan managers, ornithologists, biogeographers, zooarchaeologists, historians, and just people who are interested in swans. The reason we can do this now is because there are lots of resources online. Even when we updated the Birds of the World account in 2020, there's much more that's available online than was even 2 years ago. And in that sense, this project will never be done because there are always going to be new sources available online. So we'll always have to be updated. So we're just collecting information from every place we can, technical and gray literature, books, journals, magazines, everything we can find. And it includes any and all resources. Sometimes I'll be reading a history book and somebody will mention that so-and-so shot a swan somewhere. And it's out of nowhere, but there it is, you've got a record. Old hunting magazines are great, books about exploration are great, official and unofficial natural history surveys, and just like I said, regular histories. Whenever possible, we go to the original sources. I don't mistrust any of the original or any of the reports like Winbanco or anything like that. He was an extraordinary scholar for the resources he had at the time. But I'd rather go back and read the original papers when I can, and we often can now. So I want to make my own mistakes. And we expect new material again to become available constantly. So I don't think this will ever be done in the sense that there will be a definitive historical reference. We're not using archaeology, zooarchaeology, ethnographic, or folklore. I've talked with people who are experts in these fields, and they require a team of interdisciplinary experts to use these data right. Yeah, you can say that so-and-so found a swan bone in an archaeological investigation, but the identification of that bone depends on the reference collection, which often doesn't include all the materials that you need, especially early on. Trumpeters are not that abundant in museums. Trade routes, people traded stuff across the continent before Europeans showed up. So there's lots of little details that need to be worked through. So we're not using that right now. However, I will say that these are untapped sources of information, and I think they have a lot of potential to add to what we know about swan distribution. So I hope somebody will follow up with that. I won't, because I think I'm going to be lucky to live long enough to finish the thing that we're doing now. So there are limitations to the data. Not everyone was a trained observer. We've got a lot of French and Spanish accounts. You have to worry about translations. Some information, even in the earliest accounts we can find, is secondhand, so, or third hand. Not everybody was a trained ornithologist. Species identification, even into the early 1800s, is iffy. Have to remember that John Richardson didn't describe trumpeter swans until 1832. Before then, and even after then, lots of people just said wild swan or whatever. Some locations are very broad. We saw swans on such and such a river. Well, that river may be 500 miles long. So you have to go back and infer from the text where they actually were. They're presence only records. They have limits. Just because somebody didn't mention it doesn't mean swans weren't there. And again, the information is never ending. New stuff is becoming available all the time. So we're gonna have an artificial cutoff date, but I expect the whatever we end up with will be amended constantly and forever. So we have thousands of records for various countries, states, and provinces. Sometimes, like for Alaska or California, there are hundreds and hundreds of references of swans. Sometimes they're really detailed. Sometimes they're just a sentence in a newspaper article. I'm only summarizing some seasonal distribution by state and province through 1950. After 1950, you start to get a lot more active relocation or translocation and restoration efforts, and that tends to muddy things up a little bit. We'll probably end up cutting off this data, although we have information up to the current day. It's probably going to end up to be a good sized monograph. I don't know when it's going to be done. It's very time consuming. It's challenging. There's only so many ways to write this down. And also I have the attention of a 3-year-old, so I'll start reading these historical accounts and looking for swan stuff, and then I'll find out they were camping someplace and I'll read for 30 pages and forget what I was supposed to be doing. And then at the last thing is I've been incredibly lazy and it's hard to get going on a lot of this stuff. So, but we have uncovered a few what I think are especially interesting observations, and I'll mention those. So they don't show, these maps don't show what we currently know. They only show what the earlier sources that I have been through so far, and I've only been through a small percentage of what we've got. What those earlier sources indicate about seasonal distribution. Still got a lot to do. So remember, they're preliminary, they're incomplete. You can forget them right after you look at them. They're already obsolete. All right. And they don't indicate specific locations. I'm merely talking about the state or province that we have records for. So, trumpeter swan breeding. This is what we've got records for so far. The interesting thing is, well, one of the interesting things is there are, possibilities of swans breeding in Nevada. I still have to tease that out some. We've got pretty good records of them all the way down into Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, really good records for Ohio. Rick Landman found a nesting record, eggs in a museum from Newfoundland. That supports Harry Lumsden's hypotheses and data about trumpeter swans nesting all through Eastern Canada. You remember Winbanco's map, it goes down sort of like that. Harry extended it that way. Anyway, that's what we've got so far. And no, we've got summer records for Oregon and California. Swans can summer in places for lots of reasons, not necessarily breeding. I don't know that they're not breeding there, but I want to do more work before I conclude that they may have. And there will be a lot of qualifications in whatever final report we come up with. So it'll be trumpeter swan probably or possibly. So that's our breeding distribution so far. That's trumpeter swan wintering distribution so far. So again, we have lots of information. Birds along the East Coast, West Coast, records of trumpeter swans wintering in what is now Los Angeles as late as the early 1900s. I didn't know there were those kinds of wetlands down there, but that's one of the things we may be able to interpret from some of these other data. Swans winter in Alaska now, along the coast. They probably wintered along the southeast archipelago there and possibly along the southern coast where they do now. I just don't have the records to show that yet. We have trumpeter swans probably wintering there in northern Mexico. I don't know that province, I'm sorry. Lots of records along the Texas coast, the Mississippi River, some along the Ohio and Tennessee and places like that. So, and I'm not showing migration here because if I was showing migration records, basically the whole map would be colored in. I think when we're done, we're going to end up with distribution maps that look much like the current trumpeter swan maps or trumpeter watch maps, I'm sorry. There are going to be birds everywhere. Basically every state and province north of Mexico anyway, and even into the northern tier of Mexican states, I've got records of migrating swans. Sometimes we can tell what they are. So this is tundra swan nesting. Again, that we know about. And again, this pretty much conforms, oops. Jeez. Be nice to know what I'm doing. Yeah, that's good enough. So again, it conforms to the current knowledge about nesting in tundra and things like that. So it's his fault. There we go. Thank you. So there's our current records of wintering tundra swans. We do have records of tundras wintering in southeastern Alaska and probably out here, British Columbia along the coast and some other areas. Again, wintering in California. Not sure about Nevada yet. And again, the migration routes, practically any state or province is going to have migrating tundras through it. So who cares? Well, there's not a lot new here. There are some, at least at this scale, but there are like the Newfoundland nesting record, like the wintering records in around what is now Los Angeles in Southern California. Those do add to our understanding of where they were. We may have, I need to evaluate the records. We may have wintering swans, both tundra and trumpeter, historically wintering as far south as Florida in the eastern United States, probably following the coast down. And again, the migration, it was basically everywhere. So we're going to continue to summarize information. There's an enormous amount. New sources are always available. I think it would really help us in this effort if the various managers and biologists who were involved in restoration efforts or translocation efforts would summarize their projects. This stuff is all available online. Well, most of it's available online, but a lot of it is in annual reports. And so if you want to know what happened in Oregon or Ontario that might affect current migration in Pennsylvania and New York and things like that, you've got to go through 15 reports instead of just going to one final thing that said we introduced so many swans, here's where they moved and things like that. I think it would also be a good source for other people planning translocations. We will have more specific detail on places and dates where swans were, and it'll allow us to confirm migration routes or migration dates, possibly routes, changes in distribution over time, and we may be able to calibrate those changes to environmental or anthropogenic variables like wetland loss or development or something like that. And you fixed it, so I can't advance. Anyway, that was the end of it. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to ask. If anybody's got any answers, feel free to give them.